My name is Dale Whitmore. I spent 14 years with search and rescue, out of the Blue Ridge District in Virginia. I want to tell you about the case that ended my career, not because I've processed it, not because I've come to peace with any part of it, but because there are things in that valley that have no other witness, and I'm not willing to be the only one who knows. I want to be honest about what this is. This isn't a story. Stories have shapes you can follow, a beginning, a logic, an end you can make some kind of sense of. What happened on Black Pine Ridge doesn't have that shape. It has something else, a pattern I can see, but can't explain. And that pattern is the reason I'm still awake at 2 in the morning, most nights, sitting in a dark kitchen with a glass of something I don't need. I'll tell you what I know. I'll tell you what I saw, and I'll tell you what a 7-year-old girl said to me. 3 weeks after I carried her 2 miles out of a forest that shouldn't exist on any map I've ever seen. After that, you can make of it what you want. I retired in 2019. I was 52 years old. They gave me a ceremony, plaque on the wall, handshakes, the kind of polite things people say when they don't know what else to say to a man who's been finding lost people in the mountains for a decade and a half. Nobody asked me why I was leaving. The ones who knew about Emily Carter, and most of the senior team did, nobody asked. You develop a sense in this work for when a man has seen something the job doesn't have a category for. They knew. They understood without understanding. I didn't correct them. I should start with Emily. Emily Carter went missing on a Saturday in late August. She was 7 years old. Her family had been camping at Ridgeline Creek, a standard campsite, nothing remote. The kind of place families go when they want the outdoors without committing to the outdoors. She was there one moment and not the next. That's how it always is. You blink and the world rearranges itself. We mobilized fast. Within 6 hours, we had 42 personnel on the ground, 3 dog teams. A helicopter running grid passes over the primary search area. It was one of the larger operations I'd been part of. Emily's face was everywhere, the kind of case the public feels personally. We found nothing on day 1, nothing on day 2. The dogs were the first sign something was wrong. The teams were working a section of forest called Black Pine Ridge, older growth, dense canopy, the kind of terrain that can swallow a full-grown adult without much effort. On day 3, both dog teams refused to enter a specific corridor of that section. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say refused. These weren't untested animals. Both teams had been working searches for years, certified in area search and human remains detection, experienced handlers, the kind of operation you trust without question. The dogs sat down at the tree line of that corridor and would not move. Not fearful exactly, not aggressive. They just sat like they had made a decision. The handlers had no explanation. I filed it in my notes and kept moving. Local volunteers, the ones who'd grown up in the county, mentioned old stories about Black Pine Ridge when I talked to them in the evenings. Things their grandparents had said. I thanked them and didn't write it down. That was a mistake, though I don't know it would have changed anything. Day 6. I was working a ridgeline section alone, following a faint trail I'd almost missed on a previous sweep. It was too defined to be deer, too consistent. The spacing of it was wrong for animal traffic, too regular, too purposeful. It went up, steep, the kind of terrain a 7-year-old child has no business navigating in daylight, let alone however she would have moved in the dark. The trail ended at a narrow rock shelf, approximately 800 feet above the nearest marked trail. No climbing route access, no visible path to reach it from any direction I could identify. I documented the approach for 40 minutes before I found it, and I still cannot tell you, technically, how anyone reached that shelf without ropes and equipment neither Emily nor whatever carried her would have had. Emily was there. What remained of her had been arranged. I'm going to use that word once, and I'm not going to elaborate on it, because if I elaborate on it, I'll have to describe what I actually saw, and I've spent 6 years trying to lose some of the detail. I'd like to keep whatever ground I've gained. She had been arranged. That is a specific thing. That is not what animals do. That is not what weather does. That is not what exposure does to a 7-year-old child over 6 days. I sat on that rock shelf for a long time before I used the radio. The official report listed cause of death as animal attack, with subsequent scavenger activity and exposure. I wrote that report. I used those words. I used them because they were the words the form had space for, and because the alternative, writing down what I actually believed I was looking at, was a thing I wasn't prepared to do. I submitted my resignation 6 weeks later. I told nobody why. I'm not sure I could have, even if I'd wanted to. I want to tell you about a man named Cleet Mossy. I met him at Jax's, a bar on Route 11 that has been there longer than most of the people who drink there. This was about 8 months after I left the service. I was in the habit of driving out there some evenings. Not to drink heavily, just to be somewhere that wasn't my house, with the television on low, in a room that had other people in it. The kind of noise that makes silence feel less total. Cleet was in his 80s, former logger, the kind of man whose face has been outdoors so long it looks geological. He had the particular quality of old men who have stopped trying to impress anyone, which is to say, he said exactly what he meant, without preamble, without embellishment. He didn't know who I was when we started talking. He didn't know about Emily. He just talked the way old men at bars sometimes talk, about the mountains, about the county, about how it used to be. And somewhere in that conversation, in the particular way these things happen, we ended up talking about Black Pine Ridge. Cleet told me his logging crew had been working that section in the mid-1940s. They lost 2 men in one season, both found in impossible locations, his word, impossible, and both arranged in a manner that the crew could not account for. I didn't ask him to be more specific. The word arranged meant the same thing to him that it meant to me. The crews had a name for whatever did it. The Collector. Not a formal name, not something anyone had decided on. Just the word that had attached itself to the thing over time. Because that was what it did. It collected. Cleet looked at his glass when he said the next part. It don't kill for food. That's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Something that kills for food makes sense. You can understand that. What it does, I've had 60 years to think about what it does, and I still don't have a word for it. He finished his drink. That was the end of the conversation. I drove home, sat in my kitchen without turning the light on. I'm not sure how long. Long enough that when I finally moved, my coffee had gone cold and the neighborhood had gone quiet. I kept thinking about that phrase. 60 years, and I still don't have a word for it. I didn't sleep. 3 years after Emily Carter, in late August, the same season, the same heavy end of summer light, I got a call from the county sheriff. A girl named Lily Marsh, 8 years old, missing since the previous evening. Last seen at the edge of Black Pine Ridge. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. The sheriff didn't ask me to come back in officially. I was retired. He called because he knew I knew that ridge better than anyone still active, and because everyone remembered Emily Carter, even when they didn't say her name, and because there are some conversations where everything important is communicated in the silence between the words. I drove out the following morning. The operation had 40 people by midday, and within the first 6 hours, I started noticing the pattern. The dog teams refusing the same corridor. Not the same dogs, different teams, same location. Radio interference in specific grid sections that hadn't been a problem anywhere else on the mountain. Equipment failures the tech team couldn't explain. And 3 volunteers, independently, reporting children's voices deep in the forest. No source found, no explanation given. It was filed as an auditory phenomenon related to wind and terrain, which is the kind of sentence you write when you don't have another sentence available. I didn't say anything to the team. I just watched it happen and felt the shape of it. It was following the same script as before, almost exactly, the same sequence, the same failures, the same refusals, like something was running a process it had run before and expected to run again. I started walking the northern ridgeline on the morning of the second day, alone. I found the ribbon about a mile in, pink, the kind of thing a child wears in her hair, snagged on a branch at roughly chest height on an adult, which is to say, far too high for a child to snag it naturally in passing. It had been placed. I knew it as immediately as I've ever known anything in 14 years of field work. I stood there for a moment. The trail started where the ribbon was. It was too clean, too obvious. No undergrowth disruption, no ambiguity. Just a path that invited you to follow it. I've found trails in the backcountry my whole career. I know what a natural path looks like. I know what an animal trail looks like. This was neither. This was a thing that wanted to be found. I followed it. The trail descended. Black Pine Ridge has terrain I've never fully mapped, hollows and draws that don't show on the survey maps, elevation changes that catch you off guard. I'd worked this mountain for a decade and I still encountered sections I hadn't seen before. But what I walked into, after about 40 minutes, was something else. The trail dropped into a valley. I want to be precise about this. I've been on this mountain in every season. I have the USGS topographic surveys memorized. I have the Forest Service maps. I checked satellite imagery when I got home. Multiple sources, multiple years. That valley is not on any of them. The terrain that contains it doesn't exist on any map I've been able to find. I cannot explain that. I've stopped trying. The descent took me through a section of trail I can only describe as a gallery. Items hanging from branches, wedged into root systems, laid out on flat rocks, personal items. The kind of things people carry into the woods and don't come back with. Flashlights with the batteries long dead. A child's sneaker, red, the brand worn off by time. A rain jacket with a state park logo I didn't recognize. A compass, cracked. A length of orange surveyor's tape from an SAR operation. I could tell by the style of it. The items went back. I don't mean back a decade, I mean back a long time. I found things that looked like they'd been in the elements for 30, 40 years. The trail of them went all the way down into the valley, like a path of breadcrumbs. Except not for children to follow home. The clearing at the bottom was large, maybe half an acre of open ground, surrounded by old growth on all sides. And it was covered, I don't have a better word, covered, hundreds of items, possibly thousands, laid out across the ground in a way that suggested arrangement rather than accumulation. Though the overall mass of it was so vast that the arrangement was only visible in sections, like a pattern too large to see all at once. I walked through it slowly. I recognized things. I'd spent months after Emily Carter going through missing persons files for this county and the ones surrounding it, trying to find cases that matched what I'd seen on that rock shelf. I found 12 and 30 years that I couldn't rule out. I'd memorized the details. A red sneaker, size 4, reported missing in 1987. I was looking at it. A child's backpack with a specific iron-on patch, SpaghettiOs, I know how that sounds, reported missing with a 9-year-old boy in 1994. A ranger's jacket, district insignia, belonging to a SAR officer who disappeared in 2003 during a solo grid sweep and was never recovered. I was looking at it. I stood in the middle of that clearing and understood, for the first time, the actual scale of what had been operating on this mountain. Every significant disappearance in this region for decades, longer than decades, all of them connected to this single place, all of them connected to this single thing. There was movement in the tree line. I didn't look at it directly, I want to be clear about that. It was a decision I made, and I can't fully explain why. 14 years in the field gives you a set of instincts you don't entirely own. They come from somewhere below conscious reasoning. And every instinct I had said looking directly would be wrong, would change something. I can't tell you what I believed it would change. I kept my eyes on the middle distance and used my peripheral vision. It was tall. The wrong kind of tall. Not height exactly, but proportion. The geometry of the limbs was off in a way I couldn't name. In my peripheral vision, it looked almost human. When my gaze drifted toward it, the human quality disappeared. It was like my eyes couldn't hold what it actually was. It wasn't moving. It was watching. The smell reached me from where I was standing, pine resin, which made sense. And underneath that, something old. The kind of old that has nothing to do with decay. Older than that. Some category of wrong that I don't have a word for. Just a physical response. The back of my neck, the base of my spine. Something that wasn't quite fear, but was older than fear. Older than the part of the brain that processes fear consciously. I heard sound from it. Not a voice, multiple voices maybe, below the threshold of comprehension. Like someone speaking in another room, through two closed doors. Almost words, the shape of language without the content. I turned my head slowly and found Lily. She was sitting beside a fallen tree at the far edge of the clearing, cross-legged on the ground, hands in her lap. She was alive. She was uninjured. She looked at me with the calm expression of a child who had been waiting for someone she expected. She said, "Did it bring you here too?" I started to answer. I don't know what I was going to say. She looked past me and pointed. Something was moving through the canopy above the tree line behind me. The way large things move when they move fast. The canopy swaying, the sound traveling ahead of the source. And the sound was getting louder. The almost words, layered over each other, rising. I crossed the clearing in a few strides. Lily stood before I reached her. She came with me without resistance. She didn't look afraid. She looked sorry. The kind of sorry a person looks when they know something you don't. And they know they can't explain it in the time available. We ran. I have been in a lot of situations in this work. I have run from flash floods. I've had trees come down in storms 20 feet from where I was standing. I have carried injured people through terrain that should not be survivable in the dark. I know what pursuit feels like. The sound of something following. The closing distance. The particular quality of motion that tells you you're being closed on. I ran for what I estimated was a quarter mile. Maybe a little more. And then the sound stopped. I kept running for another few seconds before my body realized nothing was behind us. I slowed. I stopped. I stood still and listened. Complete silence. The kind of silence a forest only produces when it has decided to produce it. Nothing. Not the sound of something retreating. Not the creak of canopy settling. Not even wind. Just the absence of everything that had been there 30 seconds ago. I turned and looked back. Nothing. It had stopped. Not because we'd outrun it. I knew that in the same way I know anything I know on that ridge. Bone level, below argument. It had not stopped because we escaped. It had stopped because it chose to stop. That is the part I have turned over every day for the past 3 years. That is the part that changes what everything else means. An apex predator that stops pursuing is not a predator that failed. It's a predator with an objective we weren't understanding. It let us go. I picked Lily up and carried her. She went to sleep against my shoulder somewhere in the 2nd mile. She slept the way children sleep when they feel safe. I don't know what to do with that. I didn't sleep for the next 4 days. Lily was recovered, physically unharmed, no injuries, no signs of exposure despite 2 days in the forest, no explanation for her survival that the medical team could account for. My report stated that I had located the child disoriented in the eastern grid section. No signs of foul play. Condition consistent with 2 days outdoor exposure without significant injury. I did not mention the valley. I did not mention the clearing. I did not mention what I had seen in the tree line. I filed full retirement paperwork the following morning. HR processed it without question. They remembered Emily Carter. They understood without understanding. 3 weeks later, I drove to the Marsh house. Something Lily had said during the carry-out had been sitting in the back of my mind, half asleep, face against my jacket shoulder. She had said something I couldn't quite place. Something about the other ones. I'd told myself it was a child half dreaming in an exhausted state. I'd almost believed that. Lily seemed fine. That's the right word. Fine in a way that seemed complete and genuine. Not the thin fine of someone holding something down. Just fine. Happy. She showed me a drawing she'd done, which was what kids do when adults come to visit. Her parents were grateful in the way that used the wrong words, because no words were quite right. I sat with Lily for a few minutes after her parents stepped away. She told me the names of 3 members of the search team who had been assigned to eastern grid sections on the 2nd day. People she had never met. People whose names had been communicated only on radio channels in the operational frequency during a search that Lily was lost in the middle of. She told me the call signs we'd used. She said them correctly. Then she told me about a conversation I had alone in my truck before entering the forest. Specific conversation. What I said to myself out loud, which is a habit I have, which I don't broadcast, word for word. I kept my expression as steady as I could. She described the rock shelf where Emily Carter's body had been found. Not the general area. The specific shelf, the specific approach, the specific arrangement. A detail. One particular, distinct detail that has never appeared in any public reporting on the Emily Carter case. A detail I have not discussed with anyone. A detail that only 2 things in the world could know. Me, and whatever put Emily there. My voice was steady when I asked how she knew. She said, "It showed me. It shows everyone who stays long enough." I stood up to leave. At the door, she said it quietly, the way children say things they know are important. "Have you seen it yet?" I stopped, turned back. "Seen what?" Lily smiled. "The place where it keeps the others." I sat in my truck in her driveway for a long time, the engine off. The neighborhood going about its afternoon around me. A completely ordinary Tuesday in a completely ordinary town. I sat there and I thought about that valley, about the clearing, about the items covering the ground, about a ranger's jacket from 2003, and what that means about what happened to the man who was wearing it. And I thought about why we were allowed to leave. I want to be clear about something. The collector did not let us go because we escaped. We did not outrun it. We did not outwit it. It let us go because it wanted someone to remember where that valley is. I've spent 3 years trying to convince myself there's another explanation. There isn't. I know where the valley is, and lately, I've been thinking about going back. I used to think it let us go. I'm starting to think it just hasn't called us back yet.